Picture this. It's 2 a.m. in Hamburg, Germany, 1943. Air raid sirens pierce the night as families scramble for their cellars. But tonight is different. Tonight, they hear something new cutting through the darkness, a deep, rhythmic thunder that seems to shake the very foundations of Nazi Germany. This isn't the familiar whine of smaller British bomber. This is something else entirely, something massive, something that would change the course of the war and haunt German memories for generations. What you're hearing is the Avro Lancaster bomber, Britain's silver giant that turned the tide of World War II. But here's what most history books won't tell you. The story of how this single aircraft didn't just bomb Germany into submission, it psychologically broke an entire nation. Today, we're diving into the untold German perspective of the Lancaster bomber, and trust me, what they thought of this flying fortress will shock you. To understand the true shock of the Lancaster's arrival, we need to step back into 1940. When Germany believed it had already won the air war over Europe. The German Air Force, known as the Luftwaffe, had crushed Poland's air force in days, swept aside French aviation, and come tantalizingly close to breaking the Royal Air Force during the Battle of Britain. Even after failing to achieve air superiority over England, German commanders remained confident in their defensive capabilities. This was the context that made Lancaster's arrival so psychologically devastating. When that first wave of Lancasters appeared over German territory in 1942, Nazi commanders thought they were hallucinating. Intelligence reports flooding into Berlin described aircraft so large, so heavily armed, and carrying such massive bomb loads that Luftwaffe generals initially dismissed them as British propaganda. They couldn't be real. No bomber could be that powerful and still maintain the speed and maneuverability needed to survive the Reich's formidable air defenses. But then came the reconnaissance photographs. Then came the survivor testimonies. Then came the ruins. The Lancaster wasn't just another bomber. It was a flying battleship that rendered Germany's entire defensive strategy obsolete overnight. German engineers who had spent years perfecting their anti-aircraft system suddenly found themselves staring at wreckage from a machine that operated on principles they didn't fully understand. This wasn't just technological superiority, this was technological revolution. To truly understand the German shock, you need to grasp what the Lancaster represented in 1942. While Germany was pouring resources into experimental wonder weapons and incremental improvements to existing designs, Britain had quietly engineered what amounted to an aerial juggernaut. 4 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, the same power plants that made the Spitfire legendary, pushed this 36,000-pound monster through the sky at speeds approaching 300 miles per hour. But speed was just the beginning. The Lancaster's unobstructed bomb bay could swallow ordnance that German bombers couldn't even lift off the ground. A standard load of 14,000 pounds of high explosives was just the starting point. Modified Lancasters could haul the massive 12,000-pound tallboy earthquake bombs, and later, the absolutely devastating 22,000-pound Grand Slam, a weapon so large it had to be carried partially exposed beneath the aircraft. German pilots, accustomed to engaging Wellingtons and Hamptons that might carry 4,000 to 6,000 pounds of bombs, suddenly faced formations of aircraft, each carrying more destructive power than entire squadrons of their previous opponents. The mathematics of warfare had fundamentally shifted, was on the wrong side of the equation. The Lancaster's combat debut over German soil came with Operation Millennium, the 1,000-bomber raid on Cologne in May 1942. For German civilians and military personnel alike, this was their first taste of what Britain's new weapon could accomplish. But it wasn't just the scale of destruction that shocked them, it was the clinical precision with which it was delivered. Unlike the scattered, opportunistic raids of earlier years, the Lancaster formations moved with mechanical inevitability. They flew in disciplined streams, each aircraft maintaining formation despite fierce anti-aircraft fire. German radar operators, accustomed to tracking smaller formations that would scatter under pressure, watched in growing horror as these new bombers simply absorbed their defensive fire and continued toward their targets. Flak gunner Hans Miller, stationed near Cologne that night, later recalled, "We threw everything we had at them. The sky was black with our shells, but they just kept coming, like they were flying through a light rain instead of the heaviest barrage we could manage." Through the spring of 1942, German defenders began to notice an unsettling pattern. The mystery bombers appeared with increasing frequency, each time demonstrating capabilities that challenged everything they thought they knew about air warfare. The April 17th raid on the Augsburg aircraft factory was a revelation and a warning. 12 of these new aircraft, flying in broad daylight, penetrated deep into German territory at altitudes that made interception difficult. Despite losing 5 aircraft to fighters and flak, the surviving bombers delivered their payloads with devastating precision. The Maschinenfabrik Augsburg-Nürnberg plant, critical to German aircraft production, was crippled. Churchill himself praised the mission publicly, inadvertently confirming German fears that this was no experimental weapon, but Britain's new standard heavy bomber. What terrified German analysts wasn't just the successful attack, it was the cold calculation behind it. These weren't desperate raids by a cornered enemy. These were systematic, methodical strikes by an adversary that had quietly revolutionized strategic bombing while Germany was distracted by its early victories. The Tirpitz attack attempt on April 27th drove the point home further. The German battleship, hidden in Norwegian fjords and protected by some of the Reich's most sophisticated defenses, was suddenly within reach of British bombers. The attack failed due to weather, but the message was clear. Nowhere in occupied Europe was beyond the range of these new aircraft, but nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared Germany for the night of May 30th, 1942. Operation Millennium, the first 1,000-bomber raid in history, targeted Cologne with a force that defied comprehension. Air Chief Marshal Arthur Bomber Harris had scraped together every available aircraft, including training planes and their instructors, to mount this unprecedented assault. His goal wasn't just military, it was psychological. As Harris later wrote, the aim of the combined bomber offensive should be unambiguously stated. It is the destruction of German cities, the killing of German workers, and the disruption of civilized life throughout Germany. From the German perspective, the evening began like any other wartime night in Cologne. Air raid wardens prepared for what they assumed would be another modest British effort, perhaps 50 or 60 bombers dropping their loads before fleeing back across the Channel. Radio operator Wilhelm Jonen, stationed with the German Air Force Night Fighter Unit, later recalled the moment they realized something unprecedented was happening. Our radar screens were lighting up like Christmas trees. There were so many contacts that we couldn't distinguish individual aircraft. It looked like the entire Royal Air Force was crossing the Channel, and in a sense, it was. Among the 1,046 aircraft thundering toward Cologne that night, the Lancaster force represented the spearhead of Britain's new strategic bombing capability. While older Wellingtons, Stirlings, and Hamptons made up the majority of the force, it was the Lancasters that carried the heaviest bomb loads and flew with the most devastating precision. Cologne's flak defenses, which had confidently repelled dozens of previous raids, were overwhelmed within minutes. Obergefreiter Franz Weber, manning an 88mm anti-aircraft gun, described the horror of that night. We fired until our barrels were red hot and our ammunition was nearly gone, but still they came, wave after wave. The sky was black with aircraft. For every one we shot down, 10 more appeared behind it. The destruction was unlike anything Germany had experienced in just 90 minutes. More bombs fell on Cologne than had been dropped on London during the entire Blitz. The medieval city center, with its iconic Gothic cathedral, was transformed into a moonscape of rubble and flame. Over 45,000 people were left homeless in a single night. German pilot Major Martin Drews, one of the Luftwaffe's most successful night fighter aces, engaged several Lancasters during the Cologne raid and came away shaken. In his post-mission report, he wrote, "These new bombers absorb punishment that would destroy any German aircraft. I scored direct hits with my cannon and watched pieces fly off the target, yet it continued on course and completed its bomb run. They are built like flying fortresses. This resilience wasn't accidental, it was engineered." While German bombers prioritized speed and payload, British designers had learned harsh lessons from the early war years. The Lancaster structure was deliberately over-engineered, with redundant systems and armor protection that allowed it to absorb catastrophic damage and still complete its mission. German intelligence services, scrambling to understand this new threat, began intercepting Royal Air Force communications and debriefing captured aircrew. What they learned was terrifying. The Lancaster wasn't experimental, it was entering full production. Royal Aircraft Factory reports spoke of hundreds rolling off assembly lines in Britain and Canada. More disturbing still, these aircraft were just the beginning of a systematic campaign to obliterate German industrial capacity. Oberst Josef Kammhuber, commanding Germany's night fighter defenses, submitted an urgent report to German Air Force headquarters after analyzing the Cologne raid. The enemy has deployed a weapon system that renders our current defensive arrangements obsolete. These aircraft operate at altitudes and speeds that challenge our interception capabilities while carrying bomb loads that exceed our previous calculations by factors of 3 to 4. Immediate countermeasures are required, or we risk the systematic destruction of the Reich's industrial base. Faced with this overwhelming threat, Germany's response revealed both ingenuity and desperation. The development of Schräge music, German for jazz music, but referring to upward-firing cannon installations in night fighters. Major Rudolf Schönert, who pioneered the tactic, explained its lethal simplicity. The English bombers have no defense below. We approach from beneath, match their speed, and fire directly into their fuel tanks and bomb bays. The psychological impact on Lancaster crews was immediate and terrifying. Pilot Officer James Wright, flying his 15th operation over Berlin in early 1944, survived a Schrager music attack that killed 2 of his crew. There was no warning, no tracer coming at us from ahead or behind, just sudden explosions tearing up through the floor of our aircraft. For weeks afterward, every Lancaster crew was looking down into the darkness, knowing death could come from below without warning. German night fighter Ace Oberleutnant Martin Becker, who perfected the Schrager music technique, recorded 58 kills using upward-firing cannons. His combat reports reveal the clinical efficiency of the weapon: approach from 6 o'clock low, reduce throttle to match bomber speed, pull up to 50 meters, directly below target, aim for wing root fuel tanks, fire 2-second burst, break away immediately to avoid debris. Yet even this innovation couldn't stem the tide. For every Lancaster destroyed by Schrager Musik, 10 more appeared in the bomber streams. The mathematics of attrition remained firmly in Britain's favor. Operation Gomorrah in July 1943 demonstrated that Germany's countermeasures, while clever, were fundamentally inadequate against the Lancasters' systematic approach to destruction. Among the 787 Royal Air Force aircraft that attacked Hamburg on the night of July 27th, 353 were Lancasters carrying the heaviest bomb loads in the formation. The firestorm that followed wasn't an accident. It was engineered. British scientists had calculated the precise mixture of high explosives and incendiaries needed to create a self-sustaining urban fire. Lancasters delivered 4,000-pound cookies to blast open buildings, followed by thousands of incendiary bomblets to ignite the exposed materials. But if Hamburg showed Germany that the Lancaster could destroy cities, what happened on the night of May 16, 1943, proved that it could accomplish the impossible itself. Operation Chastise, the Dambusters raid, represented everything German engineers thought was theoretically impossible, made devastatingly real. German hydrological engineers had spent years making the Möhne, Eder, and Sorpe dams virtually impregnable. These weren't just reservoirs. They were the industrial arteries of the Ruhr Valley, providing water for steel production, power generation, and transportation canals. The dams were protected by massive concrete walls, anti-aircraft batteries, and torpedo nets that made conventional bombing attacks futile. Dr. Wilhelm Müller, chief engineer for the Ruhr Valley Water Authority, had personally supervised the dam defenses. His confidence was absolute. Even if the British could somehow penetrate our air defenses with heavy bombers, the physical requirements to breach these structures are beyond current bomb technology. They would need to place explosives directly against the dam walls underwater, impossible from aircraft. He was wrong. Exactly 60 feet above the water, flying at precisely 232 miles per hour. German radar operators, trained to track high-altitude formations, initially missed aircraft flying so low they were skimming the reservoir surfaces. When Obergefreiter Klaus Weber finally spotted them on his scope, he assumed his equipment was malfunctioning. I saw contacts moving across the water at impossible speeds and altitudes, Weber later testified during post-raid investigations. My first thought was that our radar was being jammed. No bomber could fly at wave-top height and maintain formation integrity. The German defenders at the Möhne Dam, experienced anti-aircraft crews who had shot down dozens of Allied aircraft, found themselves facing a tactical scenario they had never trained for. Hauptmann Franz Zimmermann, commanding the dam's flak defenses, watched in growing horror as the first Lancaster roared directly toward his position at an altitude that made his guns almost useless. They were too low for our main batteries and too fast for machine guns to track effectively, Zimmermann reported. We were watching precision flying that seemed to defy the laws of physics. These pilots were threading their aircraft through valleys in darkness with navigation skills that our best crews couldn't match in daylight. What German observers couldn't understand was the weapon system itself. Barnes-Wallace's upkeep bouncing bomb wasn't just innovative, it was revolutionary. A 9,000 250-pound cylindrical device that spun backward at 500 RPM, designed to skip across water like a stone before sinking against the dam wall and detonating at precisely the right depth. German ballistics expert Professor Heinrich Gottlob, analyzing recovered fragments after the raid, filed a report that revealed the intellectual shock rippling through German scientific circles. The enemy has solved engineering problems that our own teams considered theoretically unsolvable. The precision required for delivery, the hydrodynamic calculations for the weapon's trajectory, and the timing mechanisms for detonation represent advances in applied physics that suggest enemy scientific capabilities far beyond our intelligence estimates. Wing Commander Guy Gibson's aircraft began its attack run on the Muna Dam at 12:28 a.m. From the German perspective, watching through searchlight beams and tracer fire, the Lancaster seemed to be committing suicide, flying directly into concentrated anti-aircraft fire at an altitude where a single hit would be instantly fatal. But Gibson's aircraft never wavered. Flying with mathematical precision, the Lancaster released its bouncing bomb at exactly the right distance, altitude, and speed. German defenders watched in stunned silence as the cylindrical weapon skipped across the water surface 4 times before disappearing beneath the dam wall. The explosion, when it came, defied German understanding of conventional demolitions. Instead of the sharp crack of typical aerial bombs, this was a deep, prolonged rumble that seemed to come from the earth itself. The massive dam wall, engineered to withstand any conceivable attack, developed a crack that spread with inexorable certainty. Lieutenant Karl Schaefer, positioned on the dam's observation deck, witnessed the moment that redefined German perceptions of Allied capabilities. The water began as a trickle through the crack, then it became a stream. Within minutes, it was a torrent that tore away sections of concrete as if they were made of sand. In 30 minutes, 330 million tons of water were pouring through a breach that grew larger with every passing second. The psychological impact on German observers was immediate and profound. These weren't just dams being destroyed. They were symbols of German engineering excellence, infrastructure that represented the Reich's industrial might. Watching them crumble under such a precise, calculated attack shattered assumptions about German defensive superiority. Radio operator Hans Kleiner, monitoring emergency communications that night, recorded the growing panic in official channels. By 2 a.m., reports were flooding in from multiple locations. The Eder Dam had been breached. The Sorpe Dam was damaged. Entire valleys were flooding, but what terrified our commanders wasn't just the physical destruction, it was the realization that the enemy could strike targets we considered absolutely secure. The flooding that followed devastated German infrastructure for hundreds of miles. Power stations were submerged, rail lines washed away, and industrial facilities throughout the Ruhr Valley were crippled. But beyond the immediate tactical damage was a strategic realization that chilled German leadership. If the British could breach the dams, no target in the Reich was safe from their reach. By late 1943, German analysts were compiling statistics that painted an increasingly desperate picture. The Lancaster force was growing exponentially while German defensive capabilities were being systematically degraded. Major General Adolf Galland, commander of German fighter forces, submitted a classified assessment that revealed the mathematical reality Germany faced. Enemy bomber production now exceeds our fighter production by factors that make attrition warfare unsustainable. For every Lancaster we destroy, they complete 3 more. For every pilot we train, they graduate 5. The industrial arithmetic of this conflict has turned decisively against us. The numbers were indeed stark. By 1944, Britain was producing Lancasters at a rate of nearly 300 per month, while Germany's entire fighter aircraft production struggled to exceed 1,000 aircraft monthly across all types. More critically, Britain had solved the crew training bottleneck that had initially limited bomber operations. Commonwealth training programs were producing bomber crews faster than Germany could train interceptor pilots. German intelligence officer Oberst Friedrich von Losberg, analyzing captured Royal Air Force documents, discovered planning papers that revealed the true scope of what Germany faced. The enemy is not conducting random bombing campaigns. They are executing a systematic industrial dismantlement program based on detailed economic analysis. They know which factories produce critical components, which transportation nodes are irreplaceable, and which cities contain our most skilled workers. They are not trying to terrorize us. They are trying to methodically destroy our capacity to continue fighting. Perhaps the most chilling realization for German leadership was that the Lancaster represented not just British capability, but Allied industrial coordination on a scale that dwarfed anything the Axis powers could match. Aircraft rolling off production lines in Britain, Canada, and eventually the United States demonstrated manufacturing capacity that rendered German production efforts almost insignificant by comparison. Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring, whose German Air Force had once dominated European skies, privately admitted to his staff by late 1943, "We are no longer fighting an Air Force. We are fighting an industrial system. Every night, they send us a reminder that they can build aircraft faster than we can destroy them, train crews faster than we can kill them, and produce bombs in quantities that exceed our capacity to defend against them." The Lancaster had become more than a weapon. It was proof that Germany had fundamentally miscalculated the nature of modern warfare. In an age where industrial capacity determined military outcomes, Britain had created a machine that embodied everything Germany lacked: overwhelming production, systematic planning, and the technological sophistication to strike any target with precision. As 1943 ended and 1944 began, German defenders increasingly understood that they were not fighting to win. They were fighting to delay the inevitable. The silver giants that crossed German skies each night weren't just carrying bombs. They were carrying a message written in mathematics and engineering. The war was already lost, and all that remained was to determine how long Germany would take to accept that reality. By 1944, something fundamental had shifted in the German psyche. The Lancaster was no longer just an enemy aircraft. It had become a symbol of inevitability, a mechanical angel of death that appeared with clockwork precision to remind Germany that resistance was futile. Luftwaffe Ace Major Heinz Wolfgang Schnaufer, the most successful night fighter pilot in history with 121 confirmed kills, captured this psychological transformation in his final combat report. "We are no longer fighting aircraft, we are fighting time itself. Every night they return, and every night there are more of them. My men no longer speak of victories, they speak of survival. They no longer ask if they will encounter the enemy, they ask if they will see morning." If the standard Lancaster had broken German confidence, the arrival of the tall boy bomb in 1944 shattered their understanding of what was possible in warfare. Barnes-Wallis, the genius behind the bouncing bomb, had created something that transcended conventional explosives, a 12,000-pound earthquake bomb designed to penetrate deep underground before detonating with seismic force. German engineer Colonel Hans Kammler, responsible for protecting critical underground facilities, first encountered tall boy's effects during the attack on the Saumur railway tunnel in June 1944. This weapon operates on principles that render traditional fortification obsolete. It does not merely destroy targets, it liquefies the earth beneath them. Concrete bunkers that could withstand direct artillery hits have been reduced to rubble by bombs that exploded 50 feet away. The psychological impact on German defenders was immediate and profound. Underground factories, submarine pens, and command bunkers, facilities that had represented the ultimate in defensive engineering, were suddenly vulnerable to attack from aircraft flying at 25,000 feet. No depth was safe, no concrete thick enough, no location sufficiently hidden. In March 1945, as Germany's resistance crumbled on all fronts, the Lancaster delivered its ultimate psychological blow, the Grand Slam bomb. At 22,000 pounds, this monster was larger than many German fighter aircraft. Only specially modified Lancasters could carry it, and when they did, the message was unmistakable. Britain had developed weapons so powerful that single aircraft could accomplish what entire bomber formations had struggled to achieve just 2 years earlier. The attack on the Bielefeld railway viaduct demonstrated Grand Slam's terrifying capability. German observers watched a single Lancaster approach at high altitude, release its enormous payload, and disappear into the distance. The bomb's impact didn't just destroy the viaduct, It obliterated it so completely that rebuilding was impossible. The blast crater was 100 feet deep and 200 feet across, resembling the aftermath of a major earthquake. On May 8, 1945, as Germany formally surrendered, the Lancasters' true victory was revealed. It wasn't just the physical destruction, though that was staggering. It wasn't just the military defeat, though that was complete. It was the psychological transformation of an entire nation's understanding of its place in the world. German civilians who had once believed in the invincibility of German engineering now understood that their enemies possessed technological capabilities that exceeded their own by generations. Military leaders who had built careers on tactical brilliance recognized that they had been fighting an enemy that thought in terms of systems and statistics rather than battles and heroics. The Lancasters' final legacy wasn't written in bomb damage assessments or casualty reports. It was written in the German national consciousness. For survivors of the bombing campaigns, the deep drone of 4 Merlin engines remained a sound that could trigger instant psychological responses decades after the war ended. From those first mysterious sightings in 1942 to the overwhelming formations of 1945, the Lancaster carried a message that transcended its explosive payload. The age of industrial warfare had arrived, and Germany was on the wrong side of history. It wasn't just a bomber, it was a harbinger of a new kind of conflict where victory belonged to whoever could best harness the productive power of modern civilization. For Germany, that silver giant thundering through their skies each night wasn't just carrying bombs, it was carrying the future, and that future had no place for Nazi Germany. And if you want to explore more untold stories of the legendary aircraft that shaped our world, make sure to subscribe. Because every machine has a story, and every story has the power to change how we see the past and the future.